Welcome into another episode of Locked On Phillies. And in today's episode, the Phils have announced their roster for something really cool. It's called the Spring Breakout Game. What is it and who's on the roster? Well, we'll break that down for you. And also, there have been a couple of really interesting new things we've seen from Phillies starters so far this spring. Who are the pitchers that have brought some new stuff to camp? And how is it going to help them? Another question that we'll answer. And it's 21 days till opening day. Who's the best Philly to ever wear number 21? Well, he's a guy that played a couple years ago, more than a couple years ago, but we'll tell you who my pick is in today's episode.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm Connor Thomas, your host. Thank you so much for checking us out. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Please make sure you're rating and reviewing if you're consuming us in podcast form. If you're watching on YouTube and haven't subscribed yet, subscribe to the YouTube, please. It's the best way to help us out here on Locked On Phillies. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Best way to get tickets quickly to big time events. So go ahead and check out Game Time. There's this really cool thing in spring training that I think Phillies fans should know about because the farm system is going to become very important for the Philadelphia Phillies in the coming years. Right now, the Phillies roster is made up of guys like Zach Wheeler and Aaron Nola, Bryce Harper, Trey Turner, big money guys, long-term deals. But eventually the Kyle Schwarbers and Nick Castellanos and J.T. Realmutos of the world, they're going to end up going elsewhere, and you're going to have to replace them with youth that can play. How do you do that? Well, you do that through the farm system, right? And there's a new thing this year in spring training. So Major League Baseball has what's called their Spring Breakout. And what that is it's a 4-day event coming up. It starts on the 14th of March. So it'll be coming up this coming week, actually. Yes. And I'm not good with dates. And it'll be collections of minor league players, top prospects in organizations, and they'll play each other in a handful of games. It's across baseball, and you'll get to see some of the big names of players that could be big names on the major league scale in a couple years. The Phillies put together their roster, and I want to run through a couple of the names on this roster and talk to you about who you should be excited about for the Spring Breakout Series for the Phillies. Pitchers-wise, Mick Abel is probably the name here that you want to be looking at. Mick Abel and Griff McGarry are both on the roster. I'll run you through some of the other names. Andrew Baker, Gene Cabrera, Alexis De La Cruz, George Clausen, Tommy McCollum. There's a bunch of minor league guys that aren't really on the radar of Phillies fans right now, but the two that you should really know, Mick Abel and Griff McGarry. They're two of the top pitching prospects in this organization. Andrew Painter obviously still recovering from Tommy John surgery, so he's not going to be in this tournament. He's not going to pitch probably this year, but Abel's the guy to watch. Abel's the guy closest to major league ready. He's right behind Andrew Painter. He's the number 2 prospect for the Philadelphia Phillies. And he's a guy that you've looked at him in big league camp and you say, okay, he's done some things well. He's had some rough outings. He had a bit of a rough outing against the Blue Jays, but you could tell the guy has major league ability. He's just got to grow into who he is as a pitcher, and that'll happen with time. But that's the name of a guy that when Ranger Suarez's contract comes up, Taijuan Walker's contract comes up, you'll be looking at this dude and say, okay, is he the guy to fill the void for the Philadelphia Phillies if they don't retain those pitchers? We know Wheeler's here for 4 more years. Nola's here for 7 years. But you're going to have to fill out the back end of the rotation or maybe improve on the back end of the rotation. Those are guys to do it. So those are the pitchers. In the catchers, there's a couple guys, Hediger, Ricketts, Eduardo Tate. That's the name you want to know, Eduardo Tate. You look at that, and I've had people asking, are you looking at guys out of the catchers in the minors that could potentially take Garrett Stubbs' spot? And this year, I don't really think so. The only guy that's kind of close as far as experience is Rafael Marchand. He's been a little bit injured in spring training. But Eduardo Tate is a really interesting guy, right? He's only 17 years old. He's the number 9 prospect in the Philadelphia Phillies minor league system, and he hit .333 in the Dominican Summer League last year in 44 games. Like, as a catcher, hitting .333, strong arm, good defensive movements. That's a guy that you want to keep your eye on. As he's 17, so it's not like if JT Realmuto's gone in 3 years, we'll call up the 20-year-old Eduardo Tate. But if the Phillies go with an extension on JT, if they bring in another veteran holdover for the next 2 or 3 years, maybe sometime like 2027, 2028, you could be looking at Eduardo Tate as the longtime catcher of the Philadelphia Phillies. Who knows? Just a name to have on the horizon. The infielders, the main draw here is Aiden Miller. We've talked about Aiden Miller in the past. He was the Phillies' first-round pick back in 2023, last year. You know what he did in rookie ball? He hit .414. .414. That's crazy. Now, I know it's rookie ball, but he's probably going to be in single A this year and go down there. He's already playing in Clearwater. He'll be in Clearwater. So that seems to make sense for where Miller will be. We've had the conversation about, is he an option if Alec Bohm doesn't develop into a star player, or if the Phillies look in like 2-3 years to say, okay, well, Bohm's coming up on his first free agency time, could get big money. Maybe it'll be time to go with Aiden Miller at that point. That's the name to keep an eye on. Aiden Miller, according to MLB.com, the number 61 ranked prospect in all of baseball. So clearly they trust his ability to hit the baseball, field the baseball, all of that good stuff. And outfielders, look at some of the names here: Amarian Boyd, Raylan Heredia, Gabriel Rincones Jr., TJ Walton. TJ Walton, by the way, how do you think he spells his first name? You would imagine just the letters T and J. No, it's TJAYY. That's a sick name. But it's not the biggest name here. The biggest name is a guy that I have not mentioned yet, Justin Crawford. Phillies first-round pick back in 2022, a year before Aiden Miller. And the guy is a monster. Hit .332 and stole 47 bases last year in the minor leagues. He's going to be probably in high A, maybe even double A this year. Could crack through, and if he has a really good year, maybe even be looking at some extra double A time. And does he get to triple A this year? Crawford's a guy that's going to, you know him as the son of Carl Crawford. He's a guy that's going to be an outfielder for the Phillies in the future, or a trade piece for a very valuable opportunity, high-level prospect. So that is the future of the outfield for the Philadelphia Phillies, is going to be Justin Crawford, if they keep him long enough. So again, the names to remember: Crawford, Miller, Abel, McGarry. Those are the big names. And also, if you're looking a little bit further into the future, Eduardo Tate. Eduardo Tate just sounds like a great baseball name too. I would love to see him continue to develop, but again, only 17 years old. You're not really seeing too much there. And you might say, like, what exactly is this series and what's going to be going out? So each team is paired up with another team. The Phillies are paired up against the Detroit Tigers. They're going to play on March 16th down in Lakeland, Florida. So you'll get a chance to follow along with that game. I don't believe it's televised, but this is going to be one of those games where, actually, you know what? Let me see if it's on like MLB Network or something. I haven't seen anything here nothing indicates whether or not it's going to be televised. But even if you just look at the stats real quick, and when that game is played, I'll run through the numbers and I'll talk to a couple people who are down there, probably will be in attendance, and we'll get some information for you on who looked good, who didn't look good. It's one game for the Phillies, but it's a cool thing that the majors are doing. You know how they have the futures game, which is one of like the minor league all-star type of games. I think it's on All-Star Weekend, or it's right before that, where you have some young players that are voted to the futures game. It's always cool to see guys like this. Well, this is just another way of putting a focus on even more minor leaguers that don't normally get the spotlight. And that's a really cool thing, especially for an organization like the Philadelphia Phillies, who in not a year or two, but maybe like, I think 3 to 4 years, you're going to have to start looking at the farm system as the reason this team is still competitive at a championship level. And I think some of these guys coming up, Miller, Crawford, McGarry, Abel, Painter, guys like that. There's a couple other guys down there that could be interesting, but those are going to be guys that play interesting roles, whether it's as a trade piece or as an actual player for the Philadelphia Phillies. So a cool little event going on coming up this week down in Clearwater, and Lakeland, but Florida. It's all the same thing. And something to keep an eye on if you're a fan of prospects and a fan of looking towards the future. Speaking of looking towards the future, opening day is right around the corner. No, we're not to our countdown yet for opening day. We'll get to that in our final segment. But looking forward to the season and some things that could change for the Philadelphia Phillies over the offseason, guys develop things. Well, there are a couple of starting pitchers for the Philadelphia Phillies that have developed a couple interesting things, and they got me really excited. So I want to talk to you about that coming up as we continue today's episode of Locked On Phillies. Let me tell you about Fire TV first, though. It's absolutely the best. Come on, you've heard of Amazon Fire TV. Well, Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV that provides access to, listen to this, millions of movies and TV episodes. That's great. You want to be able to watch the shows you want, as well as free and live TV. If you're looking to cut the cord, well, the way to do it is the Amazon Fire TV. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball or the college basketball tournament, you're going to want to have a Fire TV so you don't miss any of the action. And Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels as well to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos for your favorite sports brands, all for free. And that includes all of us at Locked On and most of the big pro leagues and college conferences as well. Fire TV channels let you dive into all of the game analysis, highlights, and more to keep up to date on the latest in the world of sports. March Madness, NBA, Major League Baseball, everything you could really want. Not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, and travel outside of the sports sphere. They got cooking videos too. I love to cook. That would be great for me. Check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. And if you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. Trust me on this. And to learn more, visit www.amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. Over the offseason, you'll see sometimes a guy change something with his swing. A guy change his approach to fielding a baseball. A pitcher who changes something about his delivery. Or, in some cases, maybe even adds a new pitch. Well, we saw JT Realmuto, or rather we heard about JT Realmuto fixing a hole in his swing thanks to some technology the Philadelphia Phillies used to say, hey, you need to do more of this. We'll see if that pays off. But in spring training, you've already seen some really good-looking swings out of JT Realmuto. You've seen in division, just off the top of my head, Spencer Strider's got a curveball now. That guy was already dirty, but this new curveball he's developed, it's going to be a problem for hitters everywhere, including the Philadelphia Phillies, unless it's the postseason, in which case he's going to give up a monster home run like he always does. The point is, over the offseason, guys develop different things. They go and they try new stuff. They might have a coach say, hey, it would be really cool if you had this in your arsenal. And a couple of Philly starters have brought some extra stuff to spring training this year to work on. One is a development of a new pitch. One is something that I don't know that you can really teach too much at this level of baseball. I mean, you could always teach it, but once you get to the majors, we got a pitcher who did something very intriguing. So let's start with the top of the top. The guy signed a new extension this week. He pitched for the first time at spring training this week. Zach Wheeler has looked solid, but he's also, like you remember last year, he developed that sweeper, which old heads who like baseball, myself included, like I don't know what a sweeper is. Like I really don't. That's always been a slider to me. You could throw a slurve, which is kind of that in-between of a slider and a curve, maybe a little bit slower than a slider, but a little bit deeper break. You get what a sweeper is. They're just developing new names for everything. So I'm with you if you hate that. And I know John Kruk on the Phillies broadcast has always been a fan, or not a fan, of like, what in the world's a sweeper? Bottom line, Zach Wheeler developed that last year. This year he comes back with another new pitch. He's working on a splitter. Now, the splitter is, in my mind, as someone who pitched collegiately and pitched semi-professionally, I think it's an impossible pitch to throw. Like, I really do. I could never figure it out. It's not an easy pitch to develop. It's not a four-seam fastball where you just grip it and rip it. No, there's a feel, the way that you have to develop, like I'm holding the baseball now on YouTube, and the way you hold it outside the seams and everything, you have the right size hands. You got to have like the right placement on everything. There's a lot of things that you have to do to make it a consistently moving, controllable pitch. But Zach Wheeler seems like he's kind of figured it out already. And if you add a splitter, which is, if you can get it right, an unbelievable pitch to have in your arsenal. You add that to your fastballs that you throw, the sweeper, the changeup, the curve. Like, he's got so much stuff, sinker, so much stuff already that Zach Wheeler has in his arsenal. If he can add a splitter to that, well, that just becomes, it makes him even more dangerous. It's the same thing we were talking about with Spencer Strider's curveball. These guys are good as is. It's one more thing that batters have to guess about. It's one more thing you got in the back of your mind when you're facing this guy. So keep an eye out for splitters from Zach Wheeler this year. Could it mean he has an even better year? Well, that's the thing. There is no limit on how good pitchers can be. There's no limit on how many pitches you can throw. Obviously, you don't want to throw like 20 pitches because you want to focus on them all being major league caliber. But when you add new stuff to the arsenal, as long as you can control it and know when to use it, and that's going to be on JT Realmuto and Caleb Cotham and Rob Thompson to help them decide when to throw it and what times in the game it's appropriate to go to that pitch. Like, it can make him even more dangerous than he already is. So that's really good to see that Zach Wheeler is developing a dangerous pitch in the splitter. And that's been popping up kind of all around baseball. The splitter's starting to come back into style, and I love that because it's a great combination for the velocity that a lot of these guys throw with. Another thing I think is very interesting. So I was reading an article today about Christopher Sanchez, and you remember the season Christopher Sanchez had last year. Nice lefty, doesn't throw all that hard, but he's got good movement. He's got good control. He's got good poise about him. He's really comfortable attacking the strike zone. He doesn't walk a lot of guys. He can get strikeouts. He also induces a lot of ground balls. Like, we've seen Christopher Sanchez pitch. He's going to be an important part of this rotation. I know he's the number 5 starter right now, but if he can be very good, as good as he was last year from the number 5 spot in the rotation, well, that's going to put the Phillies at a major advantage against other rotations in baseball. A lot of guys, think about the past like 3 or 4 years. How many times did we come into a season saying, all right, like Nola's the 1, Wheeler's the 2, or vice versa. Then you have maybe Ranger Suarez if he's not hurt. Then I guess like is Zach Eflin's the 4 and who's your 5? I don't know. Kyle Gibson, Spencer Howard. Like, you were trying to piecemeal together a full rotation, not to mention if anyone goes down, who you fill that void with. Now the Phillies have 5 bona fide major league pitchers. And Christopher Sanchez, he didn't develop like a new pitch or anything, but he came back with a little bit of extra velo. And that's kind of rare for a guy his age. He's 27. So it's not like he's a 21-year-old who's growing into his body where you're saying, he's going to fill out, he's going to add velo, or he's going to add movement or stuff like that. But apparently he's settled into how to be a major league pitcher. He had experience before this past season, but 2023 was the year where we truly saw him become like a major league caliber back end of the rotation starter. And now he's touching like 94. And that extra 2 miles an hour, it's just like Zach Wheeler's splitter that we talked about. An extra 2 miles an hour might not seem like much, right? It only matters if you're going like 65 and a 50 and you bump that up to 67, the next thing you know, you're pulled over. Not that you should be driving 15 miles over the speed limit, but hey, we're from the Northeast. Philly, Jersey, we drive like that. Not the point. On a baseball diamond, with a pitcher throwing an extra 2 miles an hour harder, that can be a major difference maker. Not just because the fastball is harder to hit, but because now you're breaking stuff. If you're throwing it with more velo, might move a little bit more rotation, higher spin rate, or if it's still the same velocity, it looks a little bit more off speed. The harder you throw, the harder it is to adjust to the off speed pitches if you tunnel those correctly. So you're telling me a guy with great control just added 2 miles an hour onto his fastball over the offseason, and a guy who's one of the best pitchers in baseball might have just developed another really difficult to hit pitch. This is why you look at this as not just running it back. Guys get better. There's no cap on how good you can be as a pitcher. And it sounds like the Philadelphia Phillies have a couple of guys, in Zach Wheeler and Christopher Sanchez, that have made a difference this past offseason. We'll see how it translates to the regular season, but I love what I'm hearing from that. So just a little update on some new things to watch from Phillies starters. Coming up as we wrap up, it's 21 days to opening day. We're getting closer every day. Who is the best Philly to ever wear number 21? Well, I'll tell you who I think it is as we wrap up Locked On Phillies. Let's talk about Prize Picks, though. I've been telling you about them all week. You might be like, what is Prize Picks? Well, Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. They're the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. You're not playing any sharks, any professional gamblers. No, you're just picking more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections. If you get it right, you can make some money. I mean, football season may be over, but the action on the floor is heating up. Basketball's going. Whether it's tournament season or the fight for playoff home court professionally, there's no shortage of high-stakes basketball moments this time of year. You can get in on the excitement with Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app, where you can turn your hoops knowledge into serious cash. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 with NBA, NHL, and college basketball entries today on Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. You got to check them out. The interface is super easy. You just pick the player, the stat, they'll give you a number, and you go over or under. Now, I'm going to give you some better advice than what I've been giving you the past couple days. The Sixers stink right now. Go and pick a player and pick their under on whatever stat. They're collapsing right now. You can make yourself your money doing that way. That's what I would do. But either way, you should definitely download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks is the best. You pick more or pick less. Either way, it's that easy. All right, the best Philly to ever wear number 21. Who could it be? Let's run through some of the potential options before I tell you my pick. So currently, Garrett Stubbs wears the number. I love Garrett Stubbs. He will not be my pick for best number 21 in Phillies history. Could it be our boy Vinny Velo, Vince Velasquez, who wore the number from 2019 to 2021? Also no. Who are some other interesting names? Yeah, we all remember Wilson Valdez from 2010 to 2011 wore the number. You go back a little bit further. I mean, Dickie Thon, a great name, 1989 to 1991, wore number 21. There are some other good players from back in the day. Andy Seminick played from 1949 to 1957. People might not remember him. Obviously, I didn't watch him play. You look up some of the numbers. He was a really quality player for the Phillies and deserves to be in this discussion. But there's a guy I got to give it to, and he's a little bit more recent. He wore the number from 1978 to 1981, including with the 1980 World Series winning team. And that is Bake McBride. I love the name Bake McBride. I love the numbers the guy put up. I mean, he had an over 22 career WAR. He had over 1,000 hits. He batted .299 for his career. He was an all-star. He won Rookie of the Year, obviously his rookie year. And he was a staple in the outfield for that like late 70s, early 80s version of the Philadelphia Phillies and part of the World Series winning team. So Bake McBride's got to get it. There aren't a lot of recent great 21s, and he was an absolute great one. So for my pick, the best Philly to ever wear number 21, we're going with Bake McBride. Bake McBride, if I say the guy's name right. But yeah, that's my pick. And wow, as we round down, we're going to get down to 20 tomorrow, only 20 days till opening day. It is right around the corner. I cannot wait. Also in tomorrow's episode, it's Friday. You know what that means. My latest opening day roster projections. Rojas has been struggling lately. Do I get a little nervous or do I still believe in the kid? Also, bullpen changes. There's a name that I'm going to have to talk about that the Phillies acquired right before spring training, or actually right at the start of spring training. Is he going to make the roster? Spencer Turnbull. Is that a name you need to know for 2024 for the Phillies? A whole lot of stuff to get into on tomorrow's episode. So we'll break all that down then, but that's all for today's episode. Thank you so much for checking us out. Please make sure you're rating, reviewing, subscribing to the YouTube, all that great stuff. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Again, I appreciate you tuning in, and I'll talk to you next time on the next episode of Locked On Phillies.